We'll do a review of Likutei Sichas in Chelik Yudches, volume 18, the second Sicha for the portion of Shelach. This Sicha, the Rebbe explains a Gemara, which is totally not understood when we read in the Gemara in Soita over there. It's a piece of Agadata. And the Rebbe explains this whole and makes it all beautifully clear and explains the different aspects of what the Gemara means over there. And in the Sikha, the Rebbe will also explain in detail what was the Meraglim's idea, why they refused to go to Eretz Yisrael, the various different interpretation of that the Talmud Mevil de Maisa, as we'll see Biarichas in the Sikha. So basically, in the Parsha, we learn, this is the Parsha Shelach at the beginning, that Moshe Rabbeinu was sending the spies. Who did he send? So it says, Ve'ele Shmoisom, Lemati Ruben, Shamu ben Zakur, Lemati Shimon, Shofet ben Choiri, Lemati Yehuda, Lemati Yisachar, Lemati Ephraim, Lemati Binyamin, all these different people that were sent as scouters representing each one of the tribes, Lemati Zvulun, Lemati Yisrael, Lemati Menashe Gad ben Susi, Lemati Don Amil ben Gamali. And finally, we talk about in Pasuk Yud Gimel, it says Lemati Osher Sesur ben Michael, and then Lemati Naftali Nachbi ben Vovsi. These are the two names that we're going to be dealing with in the Gemara. And then Lemati God Geuel ben Mochi. Okay, so these are all the names of the tribes. So the Gemara in Soita of Lamadalad Amid Beis. So the Gemara brings down over here Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. This matter is by tradition in our hands from our fathers that meraglim al shem asayem nikru, that these spies, these scouters, because of their actions, that's the name. The names reflect what they did. We know, of course, that the meraglim came back and gave a bad report about Eretz Yisrael. So this is actually hinted in their names. And the Gemara says, "V'onu also biyodenu elo echad." We only what's come up in our hands, in other words, what we can figure out is just one. As Rashi teaches, le'olo biyodenu, Rashi says, Einonu yoidim lidresh. We don't know how to expound the other names, but one name we do know, which is the name, the pasuk that we just said. So it says, Sesur ben Michael. This was Lemati Osher. The pasuk is Sesur ben Michael. That we figured out. It says Sesur comes from Loshen Shesosar Maisov Shelach Kodesh Baruch Hu. He destroyed Hashem's actions. We'll see all these details that we're learning here. The Rebbe is going to explain in the Sikha. Everything is going to become clear, but now we're just teaching the Gemara in the Posh the Taich. And then we'll see the difficulties and how the Rebbe explains it. So Sesur, he says, Shesosar Maisov Shelach Kodesh Baruch Hu, that he destroyed the actions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what does it mean? Sosar. Over here it says in the Gemara, Maisav. Rashi quotes Sosar Dvorov. The Rebbe will address this too. So he contradicted the words. Rashi teaches Hikhish, he contradicted. But also, and he made, now when you don't want to say this about Hashem, so you use the word Soinish LaKadosh Baruch Hu. But also Badoi, he made him like in vain, like made up, who doesn't really fix or able to come through with what he promised, made him, they say, Soinish LaKadosh Baruch Hu, the enemy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the nice way, instead of saying, made Hashem into Badoi. But the bottom line, this means Sosar Dvorov. He contradicted the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then Michoel, Sisur ben Michoel. Michoel comes from Loshem Moch. She'osa atzmai Moch. He made himself Moch. But Rashi says again, this is meaning he made Hashem Moch. She'osa soine shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moch. What does it mean, Moch? Cholosh, made him weak. Because Amrin Lekamon, like we said later on, with Darshan, even the master, even though Hashem created it all, but he's the master, but still he's not able to take his vessels that he brought in from there. So they made Hashem weak. So that's how we darshan Sisur is Sosar. And Michoel, meaning he made Hashem Moch. All right. Then Amar Rabbi Yechanan says, Af onu noimar. So this is what we said before, that on Amar Rabbi Yitzchok, that onu will also be there echad. And now Rabbi Yechanan says, Af onu noimar. We can also say, we have a drosha on Nachbi ben Vovsi. That's the next after Osher Sisur ben Michoel we darshaned. He says I can also darshan the Nachbi ben Vovsi. Nachbi ben Vovsi. Afonu name Nachbi ben Vovsi. Nachbi. Sheherbi dvarav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nachbi comes with Loshen. He hid. He hid Hashem's words. What does that mean? Sheherbi dvarav. Lo yamoron k'mois shehein. So he didn't say it as is. What is Vovsi? Nachbi ben Vovsi. Vovsi comes from Loshen Pisa. He stepped on Midoisov, stepped over Hashem's Midois HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the measures of Hashem. Shepisa, Dr. Rashi, Dilag, Shlei Amron Kasher Heim. Dilag means he jumped over. He didn't say it as is. Okay, this is the Gemara that the Rebbe quotes over here. So let's look now in the Sikha. Aleph. It says in the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchok, says Rabbi Yitzchok, Dover zeh masoides biyodeinu me'aviseinu. This is a tradition in our hands from our fathers, that meraglim al shem maseihem nikru, that the meraglim, based on what they did, that's the name. The names that they carried reflect their actions. V'onu also biyodeinu ela echad. But we can only come up in our hands is just one. Which is Sisur ben Michoel. What is Sisur ben Michoel? Sisur shasosar ma'asov shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he contradicted Hashem's actions, and Michoel means, as we learned in Rashi over there, that he said that Hashem's words are not going to come true. Sosar ma'asov, Rashi says Sosar dvoriv. Michoel is Sha'osa Atzmai Moch, that he made Hashem. We said Atzmai, again, this is a clean language. Instead of saying making Hashem Moch, says make myself Moch, which is, as Rashi explained, meaning making Hashem Moch. Rabbi Yechanan comes and says, I got another name that I can darshan. Avonu Neymar, we can also say, Nachbi ben Vovsi, which is the other name that follows Sisur ben Michoel. Nachbi means shehechbi dvarav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he hid Hashem's words. He didn't say to them as it is, because he didn't go along with Hashem's promise to go to Eretz Yisrael. Vovsi is shepisa al midos shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vovsi means that he stepped over the measures of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Learn Rashi. So what does Rashi learn? What does it mean as loy also biyodeinu ela echad, that we can only come up with one main? Ein anu yoidin lidresh, that we cannot expound, which means as mirveisen zu darshanem nor einem von the meraglim. We only know how to expound one of these meraglim's name, which is Sisur ben Michoel. So even though the statement is that all of the meraglim were named based on their actions, but the only one that we can darshan is Sisur ben Michoel. And Rabbi Yechanan comes, Loidem, Darf men zogen, according to this we need to say, As Rabbi Yochanan was darshet oich dem nomin, that Rabbi Yochanan, who also expound the name Nachbi ben Vovsi, does haste, which means now we have Tzvei Nemen. So he says that we have two names now. We can come up with another name. How nit Rabbi Yitzchok. So he does not agree like Rabbi Yitzchok, who said that we only have one. As lo also be echad. He said we can only come up with one. Comes Rabbi Yochanan and says I can also come up with a drasha of Nachbi ben Vovsi. That's the way it would seem to in the Gemara. Aber based on this, stellen sich kamo shaylis in the Maimer. So we have several questions in this saying. This whole idea that we can't come up with a drush is hard. It's a difficult thing to say. If we just say that we can't have a drasha, we'll see. The Rebbe will explain later on that we don't have an applicable drasha how we today can be odeinu. This will be the Rebbe's chiddush in the Sikha, but in the Pashtus, according to this Pashat, we don't know how to make a drasha. There's so many drashas that we always do, and we know that al pidrash we don't need to have precise. Is it so difficult to come up with drashas for all these names? We have, and actually in the Medrash we do find drashas. What is it such a, if it means bepashtus that we can't find a drasha or only a drasha one or two? It's very difficult. Aleph. Was is azoy schwer einzuteichen al derech hadrush? Why is it so difficult to interpret in the style of expounding, the style of drush, the meisim from the meraglim nemen, the actions of the meraglim and their names? Bis as Rabbi Yitzchok or Rabbi Yochanan haben das gekannt tun to the extent that Rabbi Yitzchok and Rabbi Yochanan were able to do this nor by einem. Rabbi Yitzchok could only come up with one, or der zwei, Rabbi Yochanan two, for the alle nemen, all the names. Mit was seine die nemen? Why are these names anders different from the gar viele nemen in Torah, from the very many names in the Torah? Was we gefunden of the drashas Chazal, we find that the sages of blessed memory interpret them. Emes. While it's true that even in the style of drush you can't just make up stuff, but still it's much more lenient. There's a lot more room for expounding in the derech hadrush. Emes, let it be true, even in the section in which we expound the Torah, the part of Drush, is the Pshat, the Remesh, Drush, Sod. So in the section of Drush, in Torah, is eine Faran Klolim. There are also rules, Bim and Ken Darshan, and how one is able to expound. Is over fort, but yet, the Chelik HaDrush, the portion that we expound, verbunden, it is tied with a breiter and oifen halibud. It's in a wider style of learning. Hayois, since as the inyan hanidresh, the idea that we're trying to expound here, darf nicht sein mit kuvan bediuk zum pashtun taich. It doesn't have to be accurately, exactly as the simple translation. It's okay for it to expound, to go beyond. Und ois gehalten leut alle oisies, that it should be fitting and all letters, everything should fall in place, be follow everything from words of the word. You can have like maybe 2 or 3 letters of the word, and even though not all the letters are there. Bis, there steht in Svarim, to the extent, in Svarim it says that mashivin al hadrush, that you don't challenge a drush, a person expounds. So even if you think that it's not fitting 100%, but we don't challenge a drush and we accept it. So why was it not, why were they able to find a drush and all the other names? What's going on over here? Befrat, especially, the Rebbe says, as mirgefinen beferish in Chazal, we find very clearly, openly in our sages of blessed memories, droshes of andere shemus hameraglim. We do find expounding on other names of the meraglim. Biz as in Tanchuma, to the extent that in the Tanchuma, seine Faran droshes of alle von sei. Tanchuma, there is droshes of all the names. So what? Why does the Gemara, Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Yochanan, they say that it's can only come up with one or two base? Now, this other thing is Rabbi Yitzchak, if Rabbi Yitzchak is, as we were saying, is disagreeing, Rabbi Yochanan is agreeing that Rabbi Yitzchak, the language, what it means, af onu noimer, we can also say. It doesn't seem like it's a disagreement. Base, vos is the remain from Loshen. What is the meaning of the language for Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan says, af onu noimer, we can also say. Oy bergitzu adrash, if noch anomen, if what he's doing is adding a new expounding on another name, an additional name, so he should have said, we came up with two. He says, Rabbi Yitzchak should say, I have two. Or the Garbi Kitzer, or he doesn't even say, oh, look, Rabbi Yitzchak, and he should say, Nachbi ben Vavsi, explain, and the new name that he came up. Gimel. We know that if the word Omar precedes the name of the author of the statement, that means that it's not a disagreement. If the Omar follows the name of the author of the statement, then there's a disagreement. So in this case, it says Omar Rabbi Yochanan. From them was state Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, it doesn't say Rabbi Yochanan Omar. The Omar says before the name, not after the name. Is muchach, that's evident that dos is nit aplukta. That is not a disagreement. Something is different, not like we understood. According to Rashi, seems like there's another, but the fact that it says Omar Rabbi Yochanan, not Rabbi Yochanan, dos is nit aplukta. This is not a disagreement. Zwischen Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Yochanan. No, Rabbi Yochanan is blois moisif of the divrei Rabbi Yitzchak. He's merely adding to the words of Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says we can only come up with one. He says af onu neimar will also say, but not that he's disagreeing. And if you look, this is the meaning of the word. Das is doch euch der pshat hateva. This is also the meaning of the word. When you say af, also. Af onu, what do you mean also? Also, meaning in addition. Niter kriegt of Rabbi Yitzchak. He's not disagreeing with Rabbi Yitzchak. He says one, doesn't say, oh, I have two. Doesn't say that. Nor, he's merely adding a drash of Nachman Vavsi. But if he's adding a drash, then that's two against one. But therefore, we understand, bald as Rabbi Yochanan geht zu adrash, von zweiten Namen, since Rabbi Yochanan adds another expounding for the second name, is doch mechulak mit Rabbi Yitzchak. So that means that he disagrees with Rabbi Yitzchak. Welcher sagt, lo also be yedena lechad. He says that there's only one. So, yeah, the lashon is mashma af that he's not really disagreeing. But how is he not disagreeing when he says only one and he comes up with a second one? And then the Rebbe has another question, number 4, and the Rebbe says v'ikir. The main question is, so if the names actually represent a negative because of what they did eventually as the Meraglim, and they went against the will of Hashem, if that's part of their name, so why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu chose such Meraglim, which their name, and this is something which is already a tradition from our forefather that this was there. So that means that the name already at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a negative connotation with these Meraglim, why did Moshe Rabbeinu choose them? Dal v'ikar, v'bald azal shem maseihem nikru, since they are called based on what they will do, noch frier v'Moshe otzei giklib, prior to Moshe calling them, because their names were given to them in the beginning. And these are the names that the Torah enumerates here before they actually went for their mission to go and scout the land of Eretz Yisrael. So over here, and we already have them by names. The names are negative names. This is Masoidus Ma'aveseinu, meaning this has been a tradition passed along from our fathers. So, in other words, this is across the board. When you say that you have a tradition, it's not something that you can disagree about. Das is Masoidus Ma'aveseinu. Was is Masoidus is Nichaychus Kein Machlokes. If you have a tradition, there is no disagreement there. Is Vikumtes. How does it come as Moshe had say that Moshe would choose them? Befrat, as is doch a klal, there is a rule as le'olam yivdak odom b'shemes. A person should always look into the names of something when dealing with someone. You have to check in the name to see if it's fitting, appropriate. The Rebbe quotes from the Tanchum over here. But the question is, Moshe Rabbeinu picking these names, that the names have, by tradition, a negative on the results of the Masayim. Why would he choose them? And then, hey, the other question would be, we know that our sages tell us they were tzaddikim in the beginning, but here we're saying that their names point to a negative about them. Hey, wie stimmt das mit Maimer Chazal? How does this fit with their saying of our sages of blessed memory, as they that at that time they were righteous? Was Alpizei is mashma. It appears they were tzaddikim. As shoyresh hanhogasu umaysa meraglim, that the root, the way they conducted and the actions of the meraglim can also be by tzaddikim. So the names that they had, Al Shem Aseihem Nikru, could be even though they were tzaddikim. So how do we reconcile this? And so it means that Moshe Rabbeinu basically could have known their name and they could still be tzaddikim. So how do we reconcile all this? So in Ois Beis, the Rebbe is going to try to answer the second and the third question, which the Rebbe asked over here, that is he disagreeing, is not disagreeing, what does it mean? How does Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan? So the Rebbe says maybe what's going on over here is because they were just discussing they weren't really disagreeing, but it's not that they were just trying to find out which is the bring out the Masoides Ma'avisenu. Let's look inside. It would seem that the second and the third question we could answer. The question is Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yitzchak really disagreeing over there? So, because the Lashon says Omar Rabbi Yochanan, and also it says also Biyodenu, and then he says Af Onu Neymar. So it doesn't seem like that it's a disagreement. So the Rebbe says, which could have said that also Biyodenu El Echad. What does it mean? We only came up with one. Meint Rabbi Yitzchak blois zu sagen. Rabbi Yitzchak is only intending to say in his statement, as is nit der Gangen von der Masoides biyadenu ma'avisenu. What came to us, of course, there is a lot of drushes over there that they darshaned, But we don't know anything of those, what the darshan. But from the Masoides, I would say what did reach us? Not ein drash, only one drash reached us. Aber nicht, als wir kennen gefunden kein drash of the andere nehmen. It's not like we can't find a drush on the other names, but we didn't get it. It's not like we have to find, but it didn't reach us. We only heard this one. Und der Rev sagt Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan responds to that, and he says, Av onu neimer, emes take. While it is true, as for Masoides, biyodeinu me'aviseinu, that from the tradition, from our father, what we remain from that is probably madrash norafein number. So it only remains one name we have. That's what was passed along to us. We can expand another name. Nachvi ben Vovsi. So basically, he's not disagreeing, but he's saying I can find something else to darshan on another name. He's not saying he said one and I say two. He agrees that the one is that was left over from a tradition, but he's saying I'm coming up with a second one. So he's not disagreeing at all, but he's coming up with a second one. But why did Rabbi Yochanan only come up with one? Same question. But es bleibt noch die Kasha now. But the above question remains: Farvosot Rabbi Yochanan gedarshent nor ein nomen. How come he only expounded one name? Only the andere shemes hameraglim, and not the other names of the meraglim. Oich the diuk haloshin, the you look the specific language. It says le also biyodenu elo echad. It's not that le also biyodenu elo echad doesn't mean that we received only one by the tradition. We only heard one. Le also means we couldn't come up with what their drushes were, but not to say that that was passed along from them. It says also if it said we only have one, that would mean one of those 12 drushes that were Masoides biyodenu. But here it says also biyodenu, and not v'yesh ragach was l'chayre is mashma usay. It seems that the understanding from that is, as that echad is Rabbi Yitzchok's drash, that this one is not the Masoides, that was Rabbi Yitzchok's expounding. Was hat sich eingegeben darshnen, that he was able, he succeeded in expounding, but not by tradition. Und the Masoides is given what was the tradition was nor as al shem hasem nikru, the general idea that they were called based on their actions. That was the Masoides. And I came up, and Rabbi Yitzchak comes up to expound it how it is. And this is also the way Rashi writes it. As the Rebbe mentioned earlier, the Lashon Rashi, Ein anu yoidim lidrash. We don't know how to expound Ela Echad. So we're not saying Ein anu yoidim from the tradition of the that was passed along the name. There's one of them's passed along to us, but Ein anu yoidim lidrash. So we see from this Rashi also that the pshat over here of lo yosef yedeinu le'echad means that it's Rabbi Yitzchok's drasha, and therefore it turns out that Rabbi Yochanan has another drasha. So why isn't? How they're not mechulak? Why are they not disagreeing? Now, this is all what's going on between the 2 days between Rav Yitzchok and the statement of Lo also be a Daimon. Now the Rebbe is going to ask several diyukim within the statements itself. Gimel. Euch darf man verstehen in the drashis gufa. We also need to further understand in the drashis themselves. Aleph. Was meint shesosar maisov Shelach Kodesh Baruch Hu? The first thing that Rav Yitzchok darshans that it destroyed, it was soiser, the actions of Hashem. In was zetmen by the Meraglim as man zerstört Maisa Kodesh Baruch Hu? What do we see by the spies that they destroyed the acts of Hashem? So Rashi adjusted. Rashi is mefarish sosar dvorov, that he contradicted, or he took apart the words of Hashem, which means that they contradicted and they made Hashem into saying not the truth by not wanting to go to Eretz Yisrael. Aber dem Pirush kemen zogen nor loit sein girsa in Gemara. This we can only say according to Rashi's version of the Gemara, sosar dvorov. Rashi says he contradicted the words. Aber nit loit unser girsa, but not according to our version, shesosar maisav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he contradicted Hashem's action. Barum durch, but because if it just contradicted the words of Hashem, you can't say that he contradicted or he destroyed Hashem's action. Because just by contradicting the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and also and making Hashem into not saying the truth, that doesn't mean that he destroyed his action of Hashem. You're not destroying the acts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can contradict Hashem's words. So Rashi has a different version, says Sosar Dvorov, but by us in the Gemara it says Sosar Maisav. How are we going to explain it according to that? What kind of Maisim are we talking about over here? So the Rebbe quotes now, the Marsho is Mefarish. The Marsho explains. What is Maisim is he destroying? What is he contradicting over here? The Marsho is Mefarish as Maisim Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Do. And what means Hashem's actions over here? Zayin the Oisa is Vinisim. Those are the signs, the miracle, was that Eibishterot Giton mit Eden, that Hashem did for the Jews, Areiz Geindik from Mitzrayim, as they left Egypt. And he says, Unsosar Maisov. So how does this contradict by the Meraglim? Meint, Histir Vikiso, Oisom Kilu Eineroya Oisom. The word Sosar does not mean destroyed, but rather Sosar comes from Loshen hid. Histir Vikisa, he covered Oisom Kilu Eineroya Oisom, as if he doesn't see him by saying bad. About the Eretz Yisrael, it turns out that he was covering and not recognizing the great miracles that Hashem did, the Oisus V'Nisim, Kilo Einer Oisom. So, according to this, we have to change the word from Sosar, that destroyed, contradicted, to Sosar, meaning hidden. And the Rebbe says that's not the simple meaning. Aber der Pirush is nicht glatt. This interpretation is not smooth. Weil der Loshen HaGemorre is Sosar, zerstört. The Gemorre's Loshen is Sosar, meaning to destroy it. From Loshen Stiras Binyan, destroying a structure. As the Marsho itself is evident that he changes it into a different taich. He has to first translates Sosa means hidden. And then you can say he covered. So the Pasha Taich as Sosar, not Histir. Otherwise, it should be Histir if it's Kiso. But the Pasuk says Sosar. Sosar means contradicted, means that he destroyed the word. So what does this mean? That Sosar, we're calling him Susur. Ben Michoel Susur, that Sosar Maisum. What kind of Maisum did he contradict? Then, when Rabbi Yochanan says Nachbi ben Vovsi, so what does it mean? Hechbi, if Hechbi dvorov shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rashi says Hechbi dvorov v'loy omar k'moy shehi. That he hid Hashem's words. He didn't say them as is, as if to say that Hashem said something, and the spy, the Maragel, Nachbi ben Vovsi, he hid it. He didn't say as it is, but Hashem didn't say anything. He didn't say any. If it's something he hid. He didn't say what Eretz Yisrael is like, but he didn't not say what Hashem said. Hashem didn't say anything over there. Zogt Rashi, Hichbi dvarov v'lo omar k'moy shehi. He didn't say as is. He didn't move on. So this is not understood. Nicht die Rede von Ebersten hat behalten und gesagt nicht k'moy shehi. It wasn't the words of Hashem that he hid. He didn't say them as it is. Nor das was hat gesehen in Eretz Yisrael. What he saw in Israel, he didn't say as it is. The Gutskeit von Land, the goodness from the land. So why are we saying that he hid the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And then further, Vavsi, Rashi, the Gemara teaches Lahalon. The Gemara says Vavsi means Shepisa Amidoisov Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He stepped over Hashem's measures. Again, what does teach Rashi? What does this mean? Dilek Shle Amrei Kasher Heim. He jumped over, meaning Pisa means Vavsi. It comes from the language. Step over, meaning he stepped over. He didn't say to them as it is. Rashi doesn't say what is the measures of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That he jumped over and didn't give over to the Yidden. He should have, as he should have. So Rashi doesn't say what is it that that he jumped over. He didn't say that it is. We didn't say anything Shem saying or jumping over. The Marsha learned. The Marsha interprets as there Herbi Pisa. What does it mean that he hid and jumped over? Main nit as it nit iber gesagt the rate chuluk meshain. It doesn't mean that he did not repeat the words as is. As Rashi says, nor as by im gufa is given hechbi dvarav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By Nachbi ben Vavsi, he in himself, not to others but himself, he hid. By himself, it was hidden. The words of Hashem it was hidden by him, meaning he didn't really believe. He didn't believe. The rate for Eberstein, he didn't believe the words of Hashem. Shahid al ha'oretz shehi tova. Hashem testified that the land is good. So he hid those words by himself. Pisal midois shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu means also on himself. Alain hat iber gehibt. Himself jumped over. Nish gegleibt. He didn't believe in midoisov, in the measure of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means what is Hashem gives good reward for those who believe. That's the measure of Hashem. And he jumped over, he didn't believe in it. So based if we go according to the Marsha, we need to understand if we interpret like that. What is the chiluk? So what's the difference? The words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is given Herbi. It was Nachbi ben Vavsi. He hid didn't believe. Hashem's measure, we say Pisa, Vofsi. Pisa, that's the Vofsi. The Chayre, haben sie beide Leuten Pirush HaMarsha, both of them, whether it's Hashem's believing in Hashem's words, or that they're going to go up, or in Hashem's measures to pay back reward for those who trust Hashem. So they have, like the Pirush, they have the same kind of Zelm Shlei Hamin. They both means that he didn't believe. So why over here we're calling it Hechbi, and over there we're calling it Pisa. The Rebbe is now going to explain that this is not just trying to find drushes on the names. Yes, there was drushes. We know we can find drushes. What the meaning over here is that from all the drushes, that which is also biyodenu, which applies to us in our service of Hashem, there's only really one thing that we have to learn. Those drushes were important for the people then. Also biyodenu, for us, there is this one drusha, and that's the drusha of Sesur ben Bechoel. Rabbi Yochanan says, Afonu Neumar, not at the same level as it's also biyodenu, but there is still something to apply also from this Nachbi ben Bavsi. Let's look inside. Dalet. The Nekudas Habir B'Cholzeh, the point of the explanation, all the above. Das was Rabbi Yitzchok zogt, this that Rabbi Yitzchok states, Va'onu loy also b'yodeinu alechot, that we could only come up with one, doesn't mean that they cannot come up with a drasha. Is kavanosei. What he means is nit as mevesnit vitzu darshan and the shemes hameraglim, that we don't know how to expound the names of the meraglim. That's not the problem. Nor as the drash the limud was limud maybe lidemaisa, that expounding and to learn, and such a learning that brings to action. If the andere shemes hameraglim is loy also biyodenu. It didn't come up to us in our hands. We have no need for them in our hands. Bring nit uns lidei meise, also biyodenu, doesn't bring us to meise. Was mir darfen sich ablernen von the shemes hameraglim. That which we need to learn from the names of the meraglim. Loy also biyodenu. It's not for us that we need to learn what apply it into our action. The droshes for the andere shemes hameraglim and the expounding of the other names of these meraglim, seine negeya nor zu, they are only important to und in der avodah von Avosenu, in the service of our fathers. They haben sich gedacht bewornen, they needed to be cautioned from jedere, from the teus hameraglim, from each one of the mistakes of the meraglim. Our forefathers needed to have the expounding lessons from each of the names of the meraglim. They needed that to learn to each of them. Was dricken sich in the nemen that are expressed in these names. Aber biyodenu, in our is also elecha. There's really only one that mir darfen sich bewornen. We need to be cautioned. Nor from ein inyan. We only have one matter, one aspect that we need to protect and make sure. Sesur ben Mechoel. Sesur bei uns nicht sein. Sesur ben Mechoel. We should not be, by us there should not be Cain. Shouldn't be no sosar ma'asov shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu to contradict, destroy the actions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And on this, Rabbi Yochanan add, we too will say Nachzi ben Bavsi, etc. That while it is true, as I von selben Eufem wie sie es gewähnt bei Avosenu, that at the same level that it was by our fathers. Darf men bavorenen nit mer v'echad. We only need a caution. There's only one. At the level of Aviseinu needed the lesson from all. And at that level of Aviseinu, we need one. Susur ben Michoel, only Sur Michoel. Ober es is uns negeya, but it's also touches us. It's important to us. The Hadrash for Nachzi ben Vovsi. We also need to have the expansion Nachzi ben Vovsi. Aber nicht auf dem Eufen, wie es ist gewesen bei Aviseinu. Not on the same way as it was by Aviseinu. That was only Susur ben Michoel. The true Zalim in Shaykh. That's not, that applies to us. Nor af onu neymar. We can say, basically, according to our level, vidosis behesem zu unser madrege, as it's fitting to our level. In our level, we can say also this additional drasha that he brings down, Rabbi Yochanan. The Rebbe explains now in Ois Hey that first we have to take a look. What was it that the Meraglim didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael? And the Rebbe brings down what's explained in Sforim and in Chassidus, that they did not want to descend to the level of Maisa. They wanted to stay in the desert where it's level of Machshava, learning Torah, but not to go into mitzvahs Maisis. They have to go into the land and Sheishonim Tizra Sodecha. So we know that Loi HaMedrash Iker Ella HaMaisa. So, and at that time, Anoshim Ksherim Hoyu, they were kosher. So why is it? So the Rebbe wants to bring out here a deeper aspect that there is the level of Maisa, the way they did it in the desert, but there was also somewhat of a Maisa. And they want to remain with that Maisa. And herein comes the Hairoah that we're going to explain. The Rebbe will explain the different levels of what does it mean, Loi Hamed Reshikir El HaMaisa. Let's look inside. Bet Mendos verstehen behagdim. We'll understand this by introducing was Sretzach, the common Mekoimis, that in many areas it discusses as der Moker from Chet HaMeraglim is given, that what was the root, the source of the sin of the Meraglim, is given those was nit gewollt reisgehen. They did not want to leave von Zeir Seder HaChaim in Midbar, their order, the way they lived in the Midbar, on coming in Eretz Yisrael. They didn't want to come to Eretz Yisrael. An Eretz Neu Shemes, a settled place, unlike the Midbar. Was Modzei angesagt, over there they were commanded. Kisavoyu ala Oretz Goimer, when you come to the land, Sheishonim Tizra Goimer, for 6 years you must sow, as Dav Zain, Odom Chodesh, Odom Zereya, you must plow, you must sow. You need to occupy yourself with physical matters. In the language as Chassidus uses, they didn't want to lower themselves from world of thought, in which they were in the desert, to the world of speech, and especially not in Olam HaMaisa. They didn't want to come down to the world of action. That's on a general sense. And in Avodas Hashem Gufa, within the service of Hashem, this is serving Hashem, but what is within the service of Hashem itself? That's the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Is does der chiluk zwischen Torah and mitzvahs? What do you want to spend your time with? You want to spend your time with learning Torah or doing mitzvahs? Torah is chochmaschem u'benaschem. Torah is, that's your, Pasuk says, that's your wisdom, that's your understanding for all the nations. So that's a very powerful intellectual exercise what you have when you learn Torah. Limud ba'avona v'hasoga, the seichel and machshava, learning, With understanding, you grasp what you learn in your intellect and in your thought. And also to bring down what you learn, to express it, to talk about it. But on the other hand, mitzvahs is in Yonah Maisa. Mitzvahs is basically doing, it's action. They wanted to remain in the desert. The main occupation of the Jews were Limud Torah, studying Torah. Onit reingehen in Eretz Yisrael, and they didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Was dort is the Iker Avodah Ma'isa Mitzvahs. In Eretz Yisrael, the main Avodah is the act of mitzvahs. So that's the general idea of the Meraglim not wanting to go into Eretz Yisrael. They wanted to be Machshava, not in Dibur Maisa. They wanted to learn Torah and not the acts of mitzvahs. However, we know that the ultimate goal is not learning, it's the action. Not the study is the main, but it's the action. The kavona from der bria is the intent of the creation is to make for Hashem blessed a dwelling place in the world below, in the Gashmis, in the Maisa. This can be accomplished mostly through working with the lower matter. Maisa mitzvahs in the Dvarim Gashmi. Maisa of mitzvahs in the physical matter. So therefore, the objective and the desire of the Meraglim isn't really correct. It's not proper because lo hamedrash yikra el hamaisa. However, since they were kosher people at the time, how is it that they didn't realize that the main thing is maisa? This is difficult to understand. As the Meraglim at that time they were kosher. How could they make a mistake in something so main, in such a main principle that lo hamedrash ala maisa, as medafnit hom david of maisa mitzvahs, that we don't need to have the act of maisa mitzvahs? How could it be? So Muzman zogen. So therefore, we must say, as euch zei haben gewusst, dass es muss sein maisa. That they also knew that there needs to be maisa. We can't say they just wanted to ignore just learning about maisa. But they also knew this concept that that the main thing is the action. Nor sie haben gehalten, but they were of the view as is genug the maisa ha-mitzvahs. It's sufficient. The act of mitzvahs, wie sie werden getan in Midbar, as they are performed in the Midbar. Warum? Euch in Midbar, because also in the desert, hat them mekayim given kama v'kama mitzvahs, they fulfilled many and many mitzvahs. When as euch mekayim given binyan reshus, and also in optional matters, they fulfilled them kol masach l'shem shamayim. Everything that you do should be for the sake of heaven. But they didn't think as Musa ben Nitzayin the Farnumenkeit, what they weren't happy with, what they didn't think was necessary, that you need to be preoccupied in Maise, in Azaifa, to such an extent. You have to do the action. Vidos is in Eretz Yisrael as is in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, there's a full engagement in the level of the occupation. That is something that they didn't think was necessary. So now the Rebbe in Oizvav is going to explain the various levels that we have, that we say that the learning has to come out into action. In Oizvav, the Rebbe is going to bring three explanations how, in the meaning that Talmud brings to Maisa. What is the meaning that the Talmud brings to the Maisa? And either, as the Rebbe says, the Maisa becomes the proof for the Talmud, so that when he learns something properly, then his conclusion will be as the conclusion is in Maisa. So that means that the Talmud is checked by, or the authenticity of the Talmud is when it matches up with the Maisa. The second level is that the Maisa, that when you need to learn something to actually do it, then you go back and you learn over the ideas, so that the fact that you actually have to do it, you put in more energy into the seichel to come up with the right idea, because you know that the ruling is going to be according to that Talmud. But these are all in the learning part of it. But the greatest part is that when it is in the doing itself, that when you do the Maisa mitzvah, you see in the Maisa mitzvah that there is the greatness of the Talmud. As we'll see in a minute, the Rebbe is going to explain. There's a little bit of a fine chiluk over here, a fine distinction over here. But there be in them. So what's the explanation of this? The pnimius diker pshat in loy hamedresh iker el hamaisa. What is the inner meaning? That it's not mainly the study, but the action. We're not talking about that there are two separate things. There's study and there is action. And these two separate things, what's the more important? We're saying the more important is action than learning. No. That's not the only. Isn't it nor as es darfen sein, sei Talmud und sei Meise? Not that there needs to be two items. We need Talmud. We need Meise als besondere Inyonim, which are separate matters. And then when we need to choose, if we say Beide, we need to choose who is the greater of these two separate matter, is Meise der Iker. That's not what Meise is the main. That's not really the inner meaning of Loi Hamed Reshikir ala Meise. What it really means, not as der Iker von Klolus Avedus Hashem. Not two things. We're talking about what is the main of the generally of the service of Hashem. As dozol arab kumen Maisa. The main thing of the whole service is that it brings service. Should not be studying about it, but service should be doing to bring out this haste, which means that oichin medrash atzmei. This is within the learning itself. It should be a learning that brings to Maisa. Ubesignan acher, using a little bit of a different language. Oich in the fane avoda, also in the types of service, by welchem is ausgeton von Welt und Maisa, in which we are not inserted, we're not involved, we're undressed of the world and Maisa, is a Iker und Tachlis umatorah, the main and the goal and the purpose is to poil sein in der Avodah von Maisa, is to impact in the service of Maisa. So we're talking about Torah itself, but the aspect and the main of Avodah is that the learning needs to have in it the goal and the purpose of Maisa. K'maimer Chazal, as the sages of blessed memory say, Talmud mevi lidei Maisa. It's the study that leads, that brings the person to Maisa. Not in them, inyan, but in this aspect of Talmud mevi lidei Maisa, zayin do drei inyonim, in three aspects in the Talmud of the Maisa. The Rebbe will explain these three inyonim, and then we will see, while the Meraglim in the desert, in their Talmud, they had these first two aspects of Mevi Lidei Maisa, and they thought it was sufficient. They were lacking that third level, as the Rebbe is going to explain now. This is what the Rebbe is leading to. What are the three of them? So Aleph, Maise is the Even Haboichem. Maise becomes the stone that is tests, is it correct or not? The action, the Maise will test, is my svara, is my idea correct or not? As the Talmud was bring to the Maise. We want to know that this student, the studies that brings for action is Vesdarzaim. That it's the way it should be. If we don't have the examination from Maisa, we're not sure whether the study. So it proves to us, the Maisa proves to us what the idea, what the study is. Because if we don't have a way to examine the idea, is mitzad the rachvus fun seichel, because seichel has wide, broad area capacity. There can be ideas this way, ideas the other way. Und the havchone, how do we examine? How do we test? Welche svara is emes lamitoi, which is the true of the true svara? Which idea is really true? Is when a svara is oisgehalten, when the svara comes through, der feared it leads bis zum psakdin alibedilchsa. That leads you to the way the ruling is according to halacha. So if your idea matches with what the halacha, that means that your idea, you examined and you tested your idea that it is actually correct, because the Maise is the Even Haboichem, is the test for it to make sure that the idea is correct. Lepoil, into actuality. In Pashto Wörter, just to use very simple words, when do we know that an idea is correct? When das stimmt mit dem Psak Din, was steht in Mishnah Chulu Shulchan Aruch, when it fits with the ruling that states in the Mishnah, etc., Shulchan Aruch, Dvar Habayezu Halacha, the word of Hashem was Halacha. If it fits, that your svara fits with Halacha, then it's a true svara. What does it mean? This is in the study of Torah. What does it mean by Avodas HaNefesh? In the service of the soul. Meitas, that means that when the Chocha is bonus, how do we know, prove that when you had the reflection? What did you reflect? Let's say, for example, the Dukma, you had a reflection in the Reimem Yisrakel Yisbarich, Yisala, in the exaltness of the blessed Hashem, may he be elevated. The shiftless autumn, and on the other hand, you reflected on the low level of the human, thinking about Hashem's greatness and thinking about the lack of importance of the person. So when it is mitan emes, when it's with a truth, when do we know that it's true? Is when the hisbonenus bringt mit sich abechem. When this reflection brings a result with it, in actual service. So if an idea that you had, which you were meditating and you were reflecting, brings about that you do something positive, a mitzvah, with that, through that reflection, that means the reflection was correct. So that means that the action, the action that you're doing a service in actuality, is the test for a reflection that you had in the greatness of Hashem and the low of the person. That's one, the lowest of the level. We have then a second level. We have a second level where the Maisa actually increases. It doesn't just prove that the idea, but the Maisa actually increases the level of intelligence, the level of thought, that you come to a higher and deeper level, base. The number two is the Shleimus von Talmud. This brings wholesomeness in your learning. is verbunden. So when this is wholesome Talmud is verbunden mit mevili de Maisa. When it brings to action, then we know that your learning is wholesome. So we see in actuality, as sumachlid zayin, to decide, welche von the svores soisres, welche zayin do besichla, which one of these contradictory ideas, which exist in his mind, in his brain, is the richtige, which one is the correct one? Farvos is muchrech zu machlid zayin. And why is he forced? Why does he have to decide? Why can't it just remain two possibilities? Because it's something which somebody is important. You need to know what to do. So he has to come up with a resolution because one knows to know what to do. It's not just academic. It's for a ruling that a person needs to do in his life, in his daily life, in actuality. So how does he decide? Muzer nochamol durchlernen alle svaros. So he must re-study all the ideas. Nor be'amkus yosef yosef, but deeper and deeper, bis ervet kumelach lot bezeh, till he will be able to come for a decision about it. Was the far zocht man? That's why you say Talmud Godel. The Talmud becomes greater. So now, Talmud Mevil de Maisa, because the Talmud that brings you to Maisa. So what does that mean? Not as Maisa is Abchonev Talmud. Not only that the Maisa is a test, is an examination on the learning that it's correct, as we said in number one, nor as Maisa Machdem Talmud Godel. Talmud Maisa makes it that the Talmud that brings to Maisa makes the Talmud Godel. The Talmud becomes greater. As Maisa Machdem Talmud Godel, the Maisa makes the Talmud greater. But das is verbunden damit. This is connected with the fact was Maisa Ruftar is godless in Talmud. Maisa calls out, brings out greatness in Talmud. So we have two ideas over here. Either number one, the first idea is that the Maisa is the proof that the idea is correct. And the second is that when it's negeya to a Maisa, in actuality, that helps the Talmud become on a deeper level. But this is all about the Talmud. In both of these ways, however, is the Hadgoshe in Inyan HaTalmud. The emphasis is about the learning. Umalose, the greatness of learning. Either Vidos Verd Bavisen, either that learning is proven through the Maisa, or that or it's brought out, it becomes greater because you need to do something b'Maisa, b'Meila. It's all about, but who are we talking about? We're talking about Talmud. It makes the Talmud greater. The difference between these two ways is in the Mershten Eufen, in the first way, when your conclusion meets the halacha, we don't need it to be right now an issue that you have to rule. Is the negeya the ma'ase the poil? We don't. It's not important. That doesn't connect to what the action is right now. Sie is wie Maise is noch in der Welt von Sechel. That's how Maise is still in the world of the intellect. So he's intellectually going to conclude as the Maise. Doesn't have to do it. Der Psak Din, der Bechein von der Hisbonenus. That is the ruling, which is the result of the Hisbonenus in the Avodah, as Rabbi said. It's about the reflection, but the reflection is when it leads to the Bechein, when you have the result. Even if we talk about the second way, but there the discussion is, it has to actually bring you to action, which would, because it's negei lemaisa, that will bring you to the Talmud going down on a deeper level of discussion, learning it. He says, aber nor dos, but that's only as Maise bringt Shlemus in Talmud. This is all discussing that Maise brings wholesomeness in the learning. But unit with the Meile drückt sich ois, and not this advantage expresses itself in their Maise, that there is an advantage in the Maise Gufo, mitzad atzmai, that because of the Maise, it's all, the Talmud becomes greater through the Maise, but it's not the Maise in itself of Maise. But there's the third higher way. As I said, this is going to be what the Raglim missed out, this higher level. So we understand, therefore, that they thought the two levels are good enough, and so missing the third level. The third level comes with going to Eretz Yisrael b'poel. So don't know what's the Gimel? The Talmud, maybe they Maise, that we say that the great Talmud that it brings to action, Biyari is nitzulib Talmud. It's not because of making the learning greater, nor tzulib Maise Gufa. The Talmud is great, it's for the purpose of the Maise, not for the purpose of the Talmud, but for the Maise. Trokt arop dem oir haseichel, he brings down the light of the intellect in an ort for Maise, in the place of action. Azoi, in such a way as b'shas asiyosoi. When he is doing b'shas ale zayne maisim, whenever he's doing, is der Mensch durchgenommen mit neur haseichel. The person is penetrated, is encompassed fully with the light of the intellect. Das is a Maise, becomes an action for a Mensch. It's an action from a person, was by M is toikef oir haseichel begilu, with the force of the seichel is revealed. So that the Maise is a Maise which is encompassed by and is led by somebody who the oir haseichel is full force, and that makes it so much stronger. The Godel Talmud Mevu de Maise. In Ois Zayin, the Rebbe is going to continue to explain how could we have Seichel be in the Maise when they're two separate, this is in the brain and that's in the action. How could they connect when the other first two levels that we talked about, in which it's about the Talmud. So the Maise serves Talmud, but here we're saying that the Talmud is part of the Maise. The Rebbe gives a new concept over here that when the essence of the Nefesh is involved, so then there is room for the Koyach of Seichel Shabarosh in every part of the body, even in Asiya. Let's look inside. Oizai. We can Talmud. How is it possible that Talmud was in Yone is Seichel Shabarosh, whose what is Talmud is the intellect which is in the head? How could it durchnemen dimension? Shasar is in Asiya when the person is in action, he's doing something, and we're saying that at that same time he is penetrated, he is encompassed from the level of Talmud. In the Maise there is Talmud. Is the Inyan Bazer. So what's the idea? When I eat liegt in Talmud, nor in an Eufen Chitzoni, when a Yid is involved in the study, the Talmud, only in an external manner. Was mitzad Chitzoni is a nefesh, from the prospect of the externality of the soul, is Yeder Koyach Mugbal in Zain Ort. Every power is limited in their place. Seichel in Moyach, the intellect is in the brain, Midos in Leiv, the emotions in the heart, Unmaise in Yadayim, and action in the handful. Dan, when the function is the externality of the soul, then then you cannot at the same times be mit eur haseichel und in Maisa. You can't be with the light of the intellect and be in action. Und darüber, and therefore, when is arangiton in Talmud, when he puts himself, when he is involved in learning, ken Maisa mitzad atzmei. So then Maisa, in of itself, from Maisa's perspective, was his feel nidriker from Seichel, which is a lot lower than Seichel. Nit farnemen keinor bayam. He cannot take up place by him. Seiden nor in the brat was Maisa gitzu in Talmud. It only what could involve by him is the detail, that aspect of action that adds to the Talmud, but he's in Talmud fully. He's not, cannot be, Maisa cannot in of itself. Maisa only as it helps the Talmud, but not Maisa itself. Oh, berveni is arangiton in Talmud mit pnimius hanefesh, but when you are put yourself into the learning with the inner of your soul, bis as does ver der ganzer muhus seiner, to the extent that this becomes his whole essence, that's what he is, that is nicht shaykh zu sagen, then we cannot really say, as es is do an ort benafshay, that there is a spot in his, a place in his soul, was is bestiret zu sein Chochma, which contradicts his Chochma. Und in dem Eufen, and when you are fully engaged in the Talmud, is nit nor was Talmud wirkt auf Meise, it's not only that the Talmud impacts Meise, was dazu is genug de hachlote netach vahoid the Lebar Megufa, that when you do it in action, so then all what you have to do is know what the reason is, which is outside. Der Bechein, the result, what comes, the Maisa, what will come from this learning. The learning is here, and then the Netzach V'hoid, which is external to the body, that will come from the learning. That's the Bechein. That's the result. But now that is, that we're even by Chitzonis, but now that you're involved in Pnimi we can have no Nochmer, they can sein bevasachas. They could be at the same time. The Chitzonis, the Maisa, can be at the same time. The Toikev HaSeichel, the force of the intellect, wird nicht gemindert. It does not diminish. Euch b'shas der Mensch is in Maisa. That even when the person is in action, it does not conflict with the Oir HaSeichel. The Shoin HaChasidus, to use the language of Chasidus, mitzad moichin the godless, when you use the great level of intellect, which is the pnimius, the great level of intellect, etzem ha-moichin, which is the essence of moichin, kumt on the oir ha-seichel k'meishu, then the light of the seichel, as is, with its full force, in alle koiches, in all, and over, as they are in their place. It's not impacting something outside, but you come to them as they are there, until the mice. And based on this explanation, that when you have the Torah be'etzem, it actually, even in Maisa, it comes down from the Meichen is present, it's not conflict, and the full force of the Chochmah, of Chochmas HaTorah, is in the Maisa, is Yumtek Diuk Loshna Rambam. This will sweeten the precise language of the Rambam. The Rambam says, Kishem, just like, on the same way, the same force, Shachochem, Nikar b'chokhmos ichulu, that you can tell a chochem through his wisdom. Kach, in the same way, tzarich sheyeh nikar b'maisav b'macholei v'chulu. He needs to also be recognizable in his actions when he eats, etc. So what does it mean? Meaning at the same level. That when the chokhmah is in the same level as you can tell him when he's in chokhmah in the maisa. That inyan ha-chokham la-mitosi is what is the true concept of a chokham, as chokhmah wird sein ganze mehus, that chokhmah becomes his entire essence. Azoi, in such a way, as those was is a chokham, the fact that he's a chokham is niker in alle seine inyonim v'koiches. You can tell in all of his matter, in all of his powers, in themselves, just like so. You can tell in an equal way. Even when he's preoccupied with his actions, which are external matters. And seemingly they are not connected to his wisdom, because Chochmah and Maisis are distant. He's nicker in him, but you can tell in him. He's telling them, meaning that they are. It's not only that he impacts them, but he is fully in there. Nicht nor as sie werden bewirkt von Chochmos. It's not only that they are impacted, influenced by his wisdom, wie ein Sach wird bewirkt von der Zweite, as one item becomes impacted by another. Was done is sein his askus b'maisov. So then, when he occupies in his action the ace and is b'yirida from chokhmah, then it's when he is descended. He's not at the level of his chokhmah. That's when the action comes in. Ubemela, as it is demot nit azoi muvdal, since he is not so separate chulu. Mishar ha'om, as he says, he's not separated from other people. Viven erizoisi b'chamosei, because if it impacts the other things, and say, well, so then the Rambam wants that the chokhmah is separated, but if it's only like one thing impacts another thing, so then he's not so distinguished. So this Chochem is not so distinguished from the other people when there is Asuk b'Chochmosei. And Asuk b'Chochmosei is on a much higher level. Over there, he is on the level of Chochmah. And here it's only impacting. But the Rambam is saying kishem because it has to be at the same level. Nor the zelbe havdola mishara om, the same distinction from the rest of the people. Design havdola funzei beis oske b'chochmos b'deisov, as he is distinguished and separated from them when he occupies himself in the wisdom and in his ideas. The same thing is also distinguished in the Maisa. How could it be? Because when Chochmah is his whole being, is Oichven that is in Maisa, even when he's action, he still remains at his level in his wisdom. So when Oish the Rebbe goes back to explain that this is the reason why the Meraglim, even though they were Anoshim Kshedim Beis Shah, didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael, is not because they objected to Maisa in general. Lo HaMedrash Shikar Elo HaMaisa, they knew that. But to them, there was a difference between Medrash and Maisa. There was a gap. Maisa for Medrash, but not within one continuous from the learning through the Maisa. And that was the mistake. As the Shoyrish von Hanhogas HaMeraglin, what is the root of the conduct of the Meraglin, Is niet was they haben nicht gewollt meise bechlal. It's not that they rejected, they didn't want at all doing, nor was bazeyot gefällt tachlis hashlemus. They were lacking the ultimate wholesomeness in their Talmud Gufa, in their study themselves. Doir HaMidbar is in Yonei Torah. The generation that was in the desert, their idea, their concept was Torah. They were Torah. Doir Deya, they were a generation of knowledge. Zeizain and Geben in Midbar, they were in the desert, Vud, der Limud HaTorah is Betachlis HaShlemus, where the study of Torah is in the ultimate wholesomeness. By the Meraglim is over nit given, but what they were lacking, they did not have the Meraglim, them Tachlis HaShlemus, in them Inyan from Talmud, maybe they might say, they did not have the ultimate wholesomeness in that idea in which Talmud should bring you to action. The Hechster Oifon Hanal, which is the highest, the third and highest level that I mentioned earlier, as mitzad moichin de gadlus, that from the level of great moichin, was chokhmah where der ganzer musfunat mentioned, that chokhmah becomes the essence of the person, that is the moichin de gadlus, is nitoken hefsek zwischen Talmud and Maisa. There is no interruption between Talmud and Maisa. As oich when der mensch is in Maisa, that even when the person is in action, bleibt der Oir HaSeichel betokvei, the light of the intellect remains in its force. Und darüber, and therefore, is there a Reingetonnenkeit in Talmud, maybe the Meise given, and therefore their involvement being placed in the Talmud of the Meise given nicht in an Eufon von Arabkommen in Elma Meise. It wasn't in a way to descend, to come down to the world of Maisa, which is Eretz Yisrael, und dort Arabtrogen Eira Torah from Midbar, and to bring down over there the light of Torah from the Midbar. Nor they did have the Maisa, being them open for Maisa, vidos is in Midbar Gufa. Only want to do the Maisa as it's in the desert. Das meint the Maisa als öfter in Torah Talmud Maisa, to the extent that Maisa accomplishes and brings greatness to the level of Torah Talmud, Kinal Siv Vav, as we learned earlier in Siv Vav. In Ois Tes, the Rebbe comes back to explain now the Gemara. And the Rebbe explains that in the time, in the olden days, the main avodah was the avodah of Talmud. And in each one of the Shvatim, there can be a different lesson that we need to be careful why we should want to disconnect from the level of Talmud to the level of Maisa. But by us, Anu and Lanu by us, the main avodah now is the level of Maisa, because our generation is mainly the idea of Maisa. So over here, we need to make sure that we don't mess up the Maisa alone, which is Echad, which is one lesson for all, because the specific reasons aren't important, because we are not in the level of the making the Talmud at its ultimate. We're trying to make sure that there is the Maisa HaMitzvahs. And over there, there's one common theme: make sure that we do the Maisa Ela Echad. And the main thing is not to contradict the Maisa, Hashem's creation, that the Eibishter created a world to make a Dirah Yisbarach. And if we don't do the Maisa, we are being soiser. And if we don't build, it's as if it was soiser. And how does it happen? If the Eibishter said that there should be a world, then how could we? It's Ben Michoel, Os Atzma. It's talking about the Eibishter himself. The Eibishter made himself in a way of Moch Ki'ilu, that a Yid should have the Bechira to go against Hashem. Let's look inside now. Api Hanal Oistes. Based on the above, That what is the cause for the conduct of the meraglim? That started. Nit mitzad ais nagdus sumaisa. It wasn't an opposition to action, nor mitzad chisorin betachlis shleimus alimud, but because of the lacking in the ultimate wholesomeness of learning, that the learning should be on this highest level. In Zeyer Avoida b'moyach, that when they are serving with the moyach should be in a way the learning that it becomes the mahus and it penetrates, goes down to the maisa. So based on that, Vetman Farstein, the Maimer for Rabbi Yitzchok, we will understand the statement of Rabbi Yitzchok. Also, we have not succeeded in our hands. Not succeed. In our hands, we only need one chulu. In the Deiris Arishonim, in the first generation, Aveiseinu, when is given the Avodah Mitzad Moichin Sheberosh, when service was from the prospect of the intellect which is in the head, hat sich dann gefordert zu wissen, then we needed to know and how to make sure to caution us the avodah soll sein beofen hanirza. How are we going to do the avodah in a proper, desired, the way Hashem wants us to do, which is tachlis shleimus halimud? We want to have the ultimate wholesomeness in learning. Was is verbundun mit tachlis shleimus habitul, which is connected with the total wholesomeness in the subjugation. The complete subjugation brings about the ultimate wholesomeness of the limud, which therefore connects with the Maisa. Nit be by the Meraglim, not as it was by the Meraglim, as is doa hefsek, that there is an interruption between the inner service moyach und Maisa and the action. So why is there a difference? So there could be different reasons based on the shvatim. Zwischen ein Shevet und dem Zweiten. Since that in this service there are differences between one tribe and the other. Jeder Shevet hat sein derech b'shar in avodas Hashem. Every tribe has their path and gate in service of Hashem. So there can be different reasons why people are lacking that bittul, darf man wissen. So each meragel, each tribe's meragel need to know what particular issue was there that stopped them from connecting and being to that level of bittul. Darf man wissen, wie zu äußern sich. We need to know how to protect yourself from Tosh from Yedin, from the meragli, from the mistake of each one of the meragli. So there is the names Al Shem Asayim Niklu. Die Bavornish bei Jeden von Zei is Leuten Eufen Havoida von sein Shevet. The cautioning by each one of the tribes goes according to the service of that particular Shevet. So Al Shem Asayim Niklu, so we needed to know that. Oh, but in the Shpatadik's money. But in the later times, no Chorishenim Kamalach, after the time when the early ones were like angels, when Isma to Hadoiris, when the generation have been diminished. Ubefrat Venoflo Sukas David Ad Bechinas Raklayim Vakvaim, quoting the Tanya, that when the hut of David has fallen to the level of the feet and the heels, which means it's gone down to a tremendous low level. Undarike Avodah is in Asiya, the main work and service to Hashem is in doing, which is Maisa HaMitzvahs, the doing of the mitzvahs. Dan, till then, is neat Azoy Negeya. It is not so important to Bavorene, them Tos Hamaraglim. We don't have to caution exactly the mistake of the Meraglim, Vier is noch Bishor Shumakoire. as it's in his root, in the source, which means in the level of Chochmah and level of Talmud, in the Avodah, and over there in the service, nitztam. In other words, you have to make sure that the learning is nitztam, the learning shouldn't just be learning, nor tachlis, hashlemus bazeh, that you have to learn in its most wholesome capacity. When is a bit lots when in his total self-negation. Ervil nor kumen amitas dover hanilmad. He only wants to come to the item that is learned. That's his whole interest, which is basically that was an avodah for moichim. That was an avodah of the intellect. What's in them is called chad the delay. Each one according to their measure. So there is a difference between the meraglim and the problems and the lessons. What we need to caution ourselves. But by us, it doesn't matter all that. Nor in their tzeitzah b'negeya to avodas hamitzvos. We aren't concerned to be in the highest level of Torah. Our avodah is not Torah at the highest level. Our avodah is the service of mitzvahs. When it comes to mitzvahs, over there's no differences between this shevet, that shevet, but Torah achas, umishpat echas lekulanu. There is one Torah, there is one law for all of us. B'kiyum kol ha-Torah mitzvahs b'bchinas ma'aseh, by observing all of Torah mitzvahs in the level of ma'aseh. Vos is a reizge. So what was the result from Torahs from alle meraglim b'shovah? From all the meraglim equally. They had each one their own intellectual bittul, whatever was their own case, but what came out from the mistake, which is equal for everybody, as is daf nidzayin iker havoida in elam ha'maisa, that there need not be the main avoida in the world of maisa. They don't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Und das meint, lo also be yadeinu elo echad. What we got is just one aspect of it, of this whole thing. We're not going into the individual. One thing, those of us is also biyodenu. What is come up for us in our service, in unzer avodah for Shmois HaMeraglim, in our service, the names of the Meraglim, is that inyan echad. We're talking about this one unekudem shutafes from ze'ala, that common denominator of all. By us, there's only one issue here. V'yes muzayin da avodah for Maisa. How there needs to be action. V'ziz b'shaveh by Allah Eden, that is equal by all Jews in Allah, in all generations, on kein chalokim, without any of these differences. So that means also b'deinu echad, for us, in our hands, we need to deal just with one thing sure, that one comment that needs to be the idea of Maisa. You have to have the Maisa. And that caution is hinted in Sisur, in the name Sisur. He contradicted, he destroyed Hashem's action. What did Hashem do? Hashem created the world. If you don't do the mitzvahs, you're destroying Hashem's action. Hashem created the world of action, which is Hashem's Maisa Mider Kavone, with the intent as Eden Zolnim Boyin, that Jews should build it. To make from the world a dwelling place for him, blessed. And therefore, when you don't make the act of mitzvahs the main, so God forbid you are destroying Hashem's action. That the world of action remains, God forbid, destroyed. Not a built-up dwelling place for Hashem blessed, for Him blessed. It's not only that you didn't build it; it's like you destroyed it. Al derech Maimer Chazal, similar to the statement, the saying of our sages of blessed memory, that kol doir she'enei nivne Beis Hamikdash b'yomov, that any generation in which the Beis Hamikdash is not built during his days, Mailin Olav Hakosuv Kilu Echrivoy. So the pasuk counts it as if he destroyed it. So we see, not building it is not just you didn't build it, which is also leaving Hashem's world destroyed, but it's actually an act of destruction if you didn't build it. So therefore, we have to make sure that there shouldn't be sisur. But how do you come to sisur? It's a result of Ben Michael, because the Eibishter allows that in order to be bechira. Kem and doch fregen. So you can ask, however, wie bald as der Eibishter hat beschaffen die Welt, since Hashem created the world with der kavanah, with this intention. When that is called Yochel Makim B'Yoda, he can do anything. There's nobody to hold him back. Wie can I eat? How is it possible that a Jew, a Nivra, who was created, Soiser sein Maisa Kodesh Baruch Hu, how could he destroy Hashem's action? And not to allow us, the kavanah that the intent of creation to make it a dira should not be accomplished in Yedin Prat, the Me'elam HaSiyah, in every detail of the world of doing. Now, sometimes if the Eibishter didn't bring it down in Amira, in saying, then maybe you can argue that it doesn't have to be. But once it's come down in the Asara Mamoris, in the saying, then it has to happen. Bi Shloima, when the Kavanah wird nicht herausgekommen in die Buri Yisbarach, it would be okay, we would understand if this intent would not have been expressed in his blessed speech. Wouldn't the Creator, wouldn't be Asara Mamoris. Wollt man gekannt entfern, then you could have answered as Baal der Rotzen is verblieben im Achshavte Yisbarach. Since this wish of a Direle B'Tachtonim is remained in Hashem's thought, was is Hecher von Azulas Welt, which is on a higher level of something outside somebody else, the world, it's beyond the world, is as nit machriach dem Odom, therefore it doesn't force the person that he has to make it into a world. Since this will of Hashem, as men soll sich vernehmen mit der Avodah von Meise, that you should work with Meise, is gekommen begilui, in atzivui bedibur, in a command, in speech, is doch dibur shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Meise. So the words of Hashem is an action. How can a Yid contradict Hashem's action? Not exactly sure what the Rebbe means here, that Tzivui B'Dibur. Does he mean, because the Eibishter tells them to go to Eretz Yisrael, that to make a land, this is a, means that you have to go ahead and make a inyan of Maisa, or but in any event, this is something which Hashem told us. How are we able to contradict that? Is the teretz of them as their sisur, the answer, and this destruction is ben ateitzo. It's a result for Michael. He makes himself moch kel. Michael osa atzmei. The Eibishter makes himself humble. What the pirush apnim in them is. What is the inner meaning of this? As a retzich that we are discussing, nicht nur wegen der Peula, not only the action from the Meraglim, that the Meraglim made the Eibishter moch, nor wegen Kavayochel, the Eibishter himself, Michael, he makes himself moch. In order for a Yid to have freedom of choice, the Eibishter Kavayochel sich gemacht moch, he made himself humble, v'cholosh, and weak. That Hashem's words should not force the person's action. Rabbi said before, sometimes we say that the Eibishter Bechira is not, the Eibishter is not soiser to the Eibishter's Amira, but if it comes to Amira, it's soiser. If it's only Machshava, it doesn't necessarily, that's what the Rebbe was talking about before, but here, the Eibishter made it in such a way that even his speech should not force the Ma'asodim. He gave the Yid the power, Chaz v'sholem, to turn Chaz v'sholem, Hashem, to do, God forbid, against Hashem's wishes, to allow the person to be able to contradict and take apart, destroy the acts of Hashem. In Ois Yud, the Rebbe continues to explain the Gemara, what Rabbi Yochanan said, Avonu Neymar, while before we said that the earlier generation, they were dealing with the idea of Moichin, and therefore they had issues why the Moichin, how the Moichin should come down the Ish Meraglim, but we have to just make sure that the Maisa and the importance of the Maisa. Rabbi Yochanan comes to say that's not enough. Even though that we just do the Maisa, but in Maisa itself, we need the Maisa to be lichtike. We need it to be, we can't be hiding the fact that is the Dvar Havaya. Just doing Maisa alone is still also not sufficient. Just like by the Meraglim, they just did Moichin alone. And according to Rabbi Yitzchak, the first Sesur ben Michael, we need to do Maisa. Rabbi Yochanan comes and says that we also got to make sure that the Maisa that we do, that we recognize that this comes from the Dvar Hashem. Yud. So one could make a mistake, remain and think. As the einzige Zach was bedarf sich bavorn and bedeures was noch rishonim, that the only item that we need to caution ourselves in the generations that follow, that are after the rishonim, noch avesein, after aveseinu, is us as only tefillin in Maisa, that there should be no lacking in Maisa. Then Dr. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Af onu neimer nachbi ben bovsi. We too can say nachbi ben bovsi, which means nachbi shehechbi dvarov shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he hid the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oich bei uns darf oich sein de bavornish vishlila. We also need that caution, and we need to reject this idea from hechbi dvarov shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he hid the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Doing alone is not enough. You have to make sure that you're not hiding the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, davke durch them is the avodah of Maisa Kidaboy. It's only through that you don't hide the Dvar Hashem, then the avodah of Maisa can be properly. What is Dvar Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu? B'dvar Havaya Shemayim Nasu. The world, the heavens were created with the words of Hashem. These are the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Dvar Havaya, this is the word of Hashem, was his Mechai Yed Nivra Ma'isa HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That vitalizes every created being, which is Hashem's action. Darfen sich bavornen von Hechbi Dvoro, we have to be cautious, protected from not hiding his words. As the Ma'isi müssen sein in an Oifen, that the actions need to be in such a manner as menzol in zei zendem dvar havaya, that we should see in them the words of Hashem, the word of Shelach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was his mechayah, the ma'aseh, which vitalizes that action. But we get actually feel more, as we had spoken many times. Kidei as the dira lo yizbarach in olam hasiyah, in order for the dwelling place for Hashem blessed, for him blessed in this world of action, was Eden buyin duruch der avodah for Maaseh, that Maisa, which the Jews built through their service of action, so sein a lichtike, that it should be a light one, this haste, as a lakuz al dorten leichten begilu, so that godliness should be shining over there openly in a revealed way, is as durch them, cannot just say just doing. You have to do the mitzvahs to make it shine. Is as durch them was the meisim von Aiden sein and lichtike meisim. That is through the fact that the action of a yid become actions that are light, illuminated actions. With the heart in Allah meisim, that you sense in all of the action, the dvar Hashem was his emechaya, the word of Hashem that vitalizes them. Therefore, that service is done with energy, with vitality, etc. How do you start hiding that unachbi? How do you hide Hashem's word and not recognize it? Is ben, it's a son, it's a result from Bovsi. Shepisa al mideisav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you jump over the measures of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Those was by Yid can zayin chas v'sholom. This that by a Yid there could be, God forbid, hech bi dvarav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hiding the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Der hert nit dem dvar havai was mechayeh dem nivra. He doesn't sense, he doesn't feel, he doesn't grasp the words of Hashem, which violate every creation. Is mitzadem was hipt iber da avoid mitzad midas. That is because he jumps over the service, the emotional service. Doesn't get the emotional service, he just does. Was nimmt sich vom Medoisav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Comes from Hashem's measure. That's the emotional service. He just does without being involved emotionally, without Ava Yira. Durch ma'ir zayin an Ava LaHashem, when the person arouses a love to Hashem, is the Gilui Oir Elaki Benafshe, the revelation of the godly light in his soul, when is noch hecher from Welt, when he is beyond the world, be higher than Asiya, give them koyach, that gives the power, as euch wenn man vernimmt sich mit dvorim gashmi maisa, when you occupy yourself with physical matter maisa, so nit zayin hechbit dvorov shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, should not be hiding the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you need, before the maisa needs to be take also the level of midas, avas Hashem. Can't jump over that part, because otherwise you're not going to have shining actions. So the actions need to be shining as well. So now the Rebbe will explain in Ois Yud Aleph that in essence the Meraglim, they wanted to jump over the Midos and they just wanted to remain with the Olam Machshava. It's also a Nachbi ben Vopsi. But by us it's the other way, that we can't remain just with the Maisa and not do the Midas, because Maisa alone is also not sufficient. Yudalav, their mitvet men verstehen dem diuk, and this will also understand this specific language. Af onu noimar, we too will say. In other words, this is said by the Meraglim, but we too, with regards to us, we're going to say the same idea. Those was by the Meraglim is given Herbi Dvorov Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Nachbi ben Vovsi that took place by the Meraglim, that they hid the Dvorov Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hotzir genumen mitzad them, that came because Vazehom Gevolt Bleiben Elam Machshava. They wanted to remain in the world of thought. Vu es leicht bechinas Machshavte Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where it shines the level of Hashem's machshava. They didn't want to descend into the world of Dibur, which is the Dvar Havaye v'sizich mislabish in Welt, which is the word of Hashem that dresses up in the world. Azoi, to the extent as the Dvar Havaye verbleibt, behelem, so that the word of Hashem remains helem because it's not used. They remain in machshava, in Welt. So Nachbi, they wanted to hide the word of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not to bring it out into the world. Und der Nachbi ben, and why is this come? Why is the result? Why did they want to hide it at Titzov and Vovsi? Shepisa midei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it jumped over the message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By Zay, why was it by them? Why did they jump over? Is Vazem Gevolt überspringen. They didn't want to, they wanted to jump over the Darya for Midoisov Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They didn't want to deal with the Midos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Midos means that connects to others. Was hat Shaykhis mit Welt, that has a connection with Welt. The Midos for a Mensch was eine verbunden mit Azulas, just like Midos of a person that are connected with somebody else. Unemen gleich von Meichen de la Maila was Kodmu Loilam. They wanted to take straight from the Mechina above, which comes before the world, and have that level of Mechin. Because this is the Siba from the Mehelem in the word of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Sfiras HaMalchus. And that was the Nachbi that caused them to hide that the word of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Sfiras HaMalchus did not come openly. Mashenken onu auf onu never. We it's different. Wir dürfen sich bewohnen von nach 7 Wofsi. We need to caution us of nach 7 Wofsi in the verkehrten Kotze, in the opposite extreme. So sich nicht misstapig sein mit myself lane. We should not be satisfied just with action. Nor euch ton in the echere dargis havoida von dvorav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also that we should get involved in the higher levels of service of the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in B'doisav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not to just remain with Maisa, but also bring the level of Avav Yir in B'doisav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yud Beis. Yid can doch meinen, but Yid can think, Emes Take as Euch in the Deures Achronim, that it is true that also in these later generations, Dav Zayin, there needs to be nit nor Maisa, not only action, nor Euch, Avei the Pnimis Moich V'lei. We still need the mind and we need the heart. Since he finds himself in the level of the feet and heels, meaning the lowest level, is the avoid the need, then the service is nit mitan emes. It's not really truth. It's nit seichel shaberosh umidas shabalev. It's not really the intellect which is in the head, or the emotion, the way it's in the heart, nor v'seichel amidas zayin raglayim v'kvayim. It's only as the intellect and the emotion come in the heels, in the feet and the heels. It's in a lower level, not in the true level. And we can do zayin avodah zich oifer in the kavanah. So how could, through his service, accomplish the intent from Dira B'tachtonim, a dwelling place below? Was the zu fordert sich, but for that we require nit nor ma'isa alein, not just actually the avodah from Talmud. We also need the avodah from Talmud. Was balaich the avodah from Maisa, which illuminates the avodah of Maisa, but the person cannot reach that level of Talmud Be'etzim. Is there beer in that? The answer and the explanation is Baal das alle Yidden von alle Deus seine Koima Achas Shleim. Since all Yidden from all generations are like one story, one structure. Kumtuis, turns out, as the avodah from the Friedike Deures, that the service of the previous generation is the moyach v'leif from unser avodah. That is the mind and the heart of our service in raglayim v'akvayim, in the feet and the heels. B'meila, and therefore is in unser avodah b'maisa mitzvahs, in our service, in our act of mitzvahs, oich faran behelem, also in a obscure way, the kavanas reish, the leiv ha-mitzvahs. They also have the intention, the head, and the heart of the mitzvahs. And this is was Rabbi Yitzchak Bavorun gleich in Onev von seinem Maimer. This is what Rabbi Yitzchak cautions us and tells us in the very beginning of his statement. Dover ze masoides b'yadeinu ma'aveseinu. This is a tradition that we have from our father. Meraglim al shem asayim nikru. The Meraglim were called because of their action. Emes take. Let it be that it's true, as in unzer aveda bepoel mamish, that in our service, in actuality, is loyal so b'yadeinu el echad kinal barucha. We are not able to succeed. We can only do one. We don't have the Torah, the limud. We have Maisa kinal barucha. Over alles was hat sich getan in der Aveda von Aveseinu, but whatever has been done by our fathers, was in them darf sein die Bavornish for alle Shemes HaMeraglim. Over there, we need to protect all the names of the Meraglim over there. Is Maseres B'Yadeinu. It's a tradition in our hands. It does do B'Yadeinu unser Aveda. That exists in our hand, in our service. Nor das is B'Eifum from Maseres. This is a tradition. It's a hidden, a tradition, which is a general way. Also, from Golus it has not gone up from the exile and the obscurity and the blockages of the descent of these later generations. And as far as the actual service is also b'yadeinu echad, we only have one avodah, the avodah of Maisa. Und der Riber, durch unsere Avodah, But because we still have hidden the Masoiris and we have the Koyach from the previous generation, but durch unser Aveda in Maisa, through our service in action, Nishlam de Kabone, it completes the intention of Lasis Leisborech Dire Betachtoinim, to make for him blessed a dwelling place in the world below. This is Mesiches Shabbos Parshas Shelach Tovshin Chav Gimel and Shabbos Parshas Koirach Tovshin Chav Ches.